Hey, it's Dr. Rebecca Cardona here with Fear Nothing Coaching or Fear Nothing Coaching. And I just want to start off by saying Happy New Year. Happy New Year 2024 to us. With the new year, I'm going to be talking about motivation. Oftentimes, when the new year comes, we start off our New Year's with goals, 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 and more goals. I definitely have taken that track. And I know a lot of us do that with the new year approaching, with New Year's resolutions, with wanting to make the best out of the new year. So I want to back us up a little bit. And before we get into actual goals and goal setting, there's a critical step that needs to happen before we do that. And that step is connecting to our motivation, right? Because without motivation, it is very unlikely that we're going to be able to complete our goals and really sustain our goals over time. So before we jump into goals, 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 let's spend a little time on motivation. And that's what I'm going to do during our time together today. So why is it that we need to consider motivation before we get into goal setting or action steps? Because like I said, without motivation, our goals aren't going to last. And I'm sure that you can relate to this, whether it's New Year's resolutions that you've set and you did well for a month or a week or 6 months, but they really didn't sustain year after year in the way that you had wanted or anticipated or needed. So that's a good indicator that your link to motivation may need a little tweaking. So before we decide on goals and action steps to support those goals, we must first connect to motivation, but specifically internal or intrinsic motivation. So there's a lot out there if you Google or YouTube on internal and intrinsic motivation. And again, it's a critical step in goal setting and goal attainment. So what is internal motivation or intrinsic motivation? So there's actually two types of motivation: internal or intrinsic, and external. So the motivation that we're seeking when we want sustainable goal attainment is internal and intrinsic. And that is motivation that comes from being interested. It comes from satisfaction, self-satisfaction, and happiness, versus it coming from a specific outcome or an external reward or an external pressure to be or to become. So again, intrinsic motivation is motivation that is truly rooted in satisfaction, self-satisfaction. You really feel satisfied about it. You're interested and or it makes you happy. So staying motivated to achieve our goals definitely is going to require internal and intrinsic motivation. And if you've been off to a great start, but you haven't been able to sustain, again, you probably need to pay a little more attention to this internal or intrinsic motivation. And that's what we're going to be doing here today. So how do we stay motivated, right, to achieve or tap into that internal motivation? So you've got to be able to connect to satisfaction, and you've got to be able to connect in engaging in goal setting for satisfaction, for a specific interest or happiness versus a specific outcome or reward. And that truly goes against, what we're taught and for the most part, how we're socialized. And when it comes to goal setting, right? I'm going to engage, and I'm going to give this as an example down the line. I'm going to engage in weightlifting because I need to lose weight, right? That's an external outcome, losing weight, versus an internal intrinsic reward, which I'm going to give you an example because I did that over the last year and it worked beautifully. So being able to motivate ourselves, again, we've got to tap into satisfaction, interest, and happiness. So somebody that I truly like and that I'm going to use his work today as our outline, and also to show you how I weave this into my life, how I weaved intrinsic motivation into my life and how it worked, is Stephen Stephen Kotler, and he has a book out there called Ageless Performance and How to Tap into Peak Abilities at Any Age. And he outlines very 5 specific elements that support internal motivation or intrinsic motivation. So again, we're talking about if you've had challenges or struggles sustaining your goals, whether those are New Year's goals, professional goals, personal goals, whatever. If you've had trouble sustaining them and really getting the impact that you've looked at, you definitely want to take a look at internal motivation, intrinsic motivation. And we're going to use the work of Stephen Kotler today, even though there's a lot of information out there. So let's get into those 5 elements that support internal or intrinsic motivation. And I'm going to use myself as an example as I outline these 5 elements and how I wove them into my life in 2023, and how that truly has sustained over 2023, now into 2024. And my expectation is into 2025, 26, and so on and so forth. So the first element when we're looking at supporting and growing our internal or intrinsic motivation is curiosity. So I remember I started with a goal of wanting to lift weights, and I wasn't curious about lifting weights for an external outcome like losing weight. I really truly was curious because I wanted to see that if my body would take on a different shape if I did lift weights. So I run about, on average 4 to 5 times a week. And I hadn't lifted weights, my gosh, since 10 years ago. So I was truly curious to say, okay, if I add in some weights, will my body take a different shape? So curiosity is the first. And again, I didn't do it because I felt like I had to lose weight or the pressure that I needed to look a certain way or a specific outcome. I was just curious, would my body take on a different shape? So that's the first element, curiosity. You've got to have an internal curiosity that excites you, right? That you want to be curious about and really investigate, not for anybody but yourself. The second element is passion, okay? It's got to be linked to your passion. So what is passion, right? Passion, it elicits and elates good emotions inside of us that are linked to our values and our passions, right? So again, we talked about internal motivation kind of building upon satisfaction and interest and happiness. So I definitely had to link this to a passion for it to continue and sustain. So why would lifting weights, how could that tap into my passion, right? Well, I am very passionate about self-care and allowing for self-care and teaching self-care to others. So including weightlifting as a possible self-care option where there wasn't force or pressure or an external motivation, but something that truly brought me satisfaction and happiness, right? And interest was something that I wanted to explore because I always haven't had a good relationship with exercise. I at first, when I first started exercising, it felt very forced and like I was doing just for external, not because it was something that I was interested in or that I found satisfaction in. So I linked it to my passion, and sure enough, it definitely is about self-care, and that was exciting for me. So remember, first step, be curious. Second, link your goals to your passions, which are directly related to your values, right? And what excites you. The third element is purpose, all right? We have to be able to attach purpose to our motivation before we set goals. So what would be my purpose, right, in lifting weights? Well, my purpose, right, one of my big purposes, and it plays out every day in my coaching, is that I want to help people give themselves a great life despite challenges. And that's including myself. I live what I coach and I live what I teach. So my purpose is helping give other people, to include myself, a great life despite challenges. Well, goodness gracious, we all know the challenges of the external, right? The temptations with food, the pleasure of food, but not only that, what our bodies should look like, how we should look. And I truly wanted to be able to find strategies that are linked more towards that internal motivation and that intrinsic motivation versus the external reward of the outcome. And then help people link to that so that they can give themselves a great life despite challenges, right? And we know that we're bombarded on a daily basis with, all kind of exciting things when it comes to eating and lifestyle, as well as how we should look and why we should look that way. Not necessarily because it comes from an internal place, but it comes from that external pressure. So I leaned to my purpose, right? I was curious. My passion was there as far as self-care and exploring and being curious around, could weights truly be something that was self-care that I enjoyed, that relaxed me, that brought happiness and interest? And then, of course, I linked it to my purpose, which was adding and giving myself a great life despite challenges. So now let's move into the fourth element that Kotler identifies, and that's autonomy. I had to choose independently from external pressures and from external reward that I wanted to invest in lifting weights because I was passionate about it. It brought me purpose. And also I was curious, right? But I did that for me, not for anybody else and not for the external world. I did it because I wanted to learn more and I wanted to get skilled in seeing that truly if I lifted weights, would it change how my body, would it change my body shape? Would it add to my self-care and would it add to my quality of life and well-being? But I chose that, right? Again, eliminating those external pressures, those external forces, and those external rewards. And so I had to do it for me. And definitely because it was linked to curiosity and purpose and passion, I was doing it for me. And again, that just added to the excitement of it. So we've got curiosity, we've got passion, we've got purpose and autonomy. And the last element that we need when we're examining and building the foundation of internal motivation before we get into goal setting and action steps is mastery. We have to be able to have some type of attachment that we're going to learn and grow for me, by me, right? In support of my purpose and my passion. So I knew that I was interested in and curious about lifting weights, if it would change my body shape. It supported my purpose, right? Which is helping people give themselves a great life despite challenges, to including myself. It's directly related to something that I'm passionate about, which is self-care, and it's something that feels good that I can take my time to do. And it also was going to add to my learning and growth. Could this really take shape with all of these formats? And sure enough, it did. So in 2023, and I'm going to get a little more specific, my goal was to be able to engage in weightlifting, to be curious to see if it changed my shape, my overall quality of life and well-being. And it did. I was able to, and I told you that I ran 4 to 5 days a week. I was able to lose weight. And I was able to enjoy working out, and it became, and it still is in 2024, a part of my self-care, anywhere from 2 to 3 days a week. Now, what I'm going to do in my next series of videos is I'm going to talk more about, once I have located that internal motivation and that intrinsic motivation, how we then jump into creating goals that support your internal motivation, but also give you tips on how to attain goals, how to reach your goals, action steps in relationship to your goals, and daily routines that support those goals. But you can see first and foremost that what I had to attach to, and what most of us miss when we don't sustain our goals, is attaching to that internal motivation, that intrinsic motivation, before we get into those goals, those specific action steps, and those daily routines. So I surely hope this has helped you kind of have some clarity, so you don't beat up yourself if you haven't been able to sustain your goals, and have clarity on what it means to give yourself permission to explore internal motivation, intrinsic motivation, just before you jump into goal settings, action steps, daily routines. And if you find this to be a challenge, of course, please feel free to reach out. You know, I always do free consultations, and I'll be happy to support, encourage you, and guide you to tapping into your internal motivation, your intrinsic motivation, because it's there. You have it and you got it. All right, Rebecca Cardona, Dr. Rebecca Cardona with Fear Nothing Coaching. And again, Happy New Year, and find that internal intrinsic motivation.